Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about champion voiceovers, which is a subject that actually came up about a month ago or so over on League Twitter, especially with regards to Zeri's appearance in League of Legends and how short her voiceover is. And I wanted to discuss the importance of champion voiceovers as it pertains to League of Legends. I feel like that's one thing about the game that a lot of players kind of take for granted and don't assume a lot about, but I think is a very not underutilized tool, because Riot has utilized it to great effect with some other characters, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I feel like it's one of those things that Riot has sort of let fall by the wayside, and it's something that I think is a big mistake for them to let go in this manner, because I think it's a tremendous advantage for them to have. But either way, let's go ahead and start talking about champion voiceovers. Now, League of Legends as a game, and you bear with me here for a little bit, it's going to take me a little bit to get there. But so League of Legends as a game has a vested interest in making their characters as interesting and exciting as possible. This is a game that has sold itself based off of the fantasy of its characters. You have to, you have to have fallen in love with the characters. You need to find, ideally, when a player first picks up the game, they can look at the entire roster of 150 characters and say, this one I like. And ideally, that's what's going to get them to keep playing the game, right? Like, yeah, the gameplay is fine, and there are going to be some people who are going to enjoy it from the gameplay perspective. But, like, realistically, it's because you're going to like the characters. It's a very character-focused game. And one of the best ways in which you can help someone decide, hey, I really like this character in particular, is find a way for people to like them as a character. Gameplay mechanics, especially for newer players, aren't that exciting. You're not going to look at a character's kit when you haven't played the game ever and say, oh, okay, like, that seems really powerful, right? Because you don't know anything about the game yet. You don't. You're kind of still figuring that out. What you're more likely to do is say, I want to play Darius because he's a big, scary guy with an axe, and that seems like it would be really fun, and I would much rather do that, right? And so, because of this, then, Riot has a very vested interest in making their characters interesting and exciting and something that people want to play as, right? And this is one of the reasons even why in their stated goals, like why they don't make monster champions as much anymore, is because people are less likely to relate to monster champions. They are less likely to find them interesting or exciting. People are going to look at a monster like Vel'Koz or Cho'Gath and say, I don't really care. It's a big spooky monster guy, who cares? Which, like, look, I do disagree with that, but you can kind of understand then the opinion here. And so in this regard, I think that if you're trying to make people fall in love with your characters specifically, that is a very difficult proposition for League of Legends, the game, to do. And that's because League of Legends is completely divorced from the lore, right? Unlike a story-focused game like Ruined King, in order to stay in the Runeterra IP, right? Ruined King has a lot of good character moments. You have the character animations, but also you have characters interacting with each other and saying the things that they believe, or the places they've been to, or the things they've seen, and that then lets you get to know them and get to potentially appreciate them more than you may have otherwise. I think, for example, Pyke gets a huge advantage from his presence in Ruined King due to the fact that you get to kind of see more of this character who, up until that point, has just sort of been a mindless murder bot, and all of a sudden, we kind of get to see another side of Pyke, and that's something that then you can say, oh, wow, wait, this character is actually really cool. Not from just the perspective that he murders people, right? But from the perspective of all of a sudden, I get to know him as a person. And that, I think, is a very powerful way in order to make people like characters. But League of Legends can't do that. Because, as mentioned, it's divorced from the lore. Nothing that happens in-game is canonical, right? So, in that regard, you don't have a story in order to say, this is why people will like this game. And there are other ways of conveying character in League of Legends. Animations, for example, are very good ways of, sort of showing how a character fights or how they walk or how they do the things they do. Like, okay, sure, I can see why that would help let someone know what a character is like. But voiceover, I think, is one of the biggest things you have, Riot Games has, in order to help players fall in love with characters. Because, sure, seeing how a character moves or fights or whatever will tell you some things, but I think that also it can kind of help reinforce expectations in uninteresting ways. Let me tell you what I mean. Galio, I think, is a really good example of a champion whose voiceover does a massive, massive service to him. Because if you look at Galio and you look at his idle animations and you look at his splash art and you look at his model, you're going to say, okay, this is like big, stompy, fighty guy, right, who's made of stone. Okay, fine. I kind of get the measure of that. That's all I need to know. But when you start listening to Galio's voiceover, all of a sudden you realize, wait, hold on. Galio has this kind of like tragic story with him, and he has, you know, his own hopes and fears about the people of Demacia and how he, you know, was created to fight magic, but can't stand when it's gone, right? Because that's, you know, a big disadvantage for him, right? There are just like a lot of things that all of a sudden you get to know about Galio, and all of a sudden you stop treating him as just a big stompy fighty guy, and you kind of get to know him as, you know, almost a person. Obviously, he's not, you know, an actual person, but you get to know him as such. And that is a huge advantage because all of a sudden this character, who beforehand you would probably have no interest in whatsoever, is more of a character. And this even works for other characters that are less serious, right? Kled, for example, is mostly a jokey character. I'm not going to lie to you guys. That character is memes and bullshit. That is who Kled is as a character. But having the benefit of his voiceover, all of a sudden, you know, Kled has some interesting lines. You realize he's fought in all of these battles, and that some of which were important. You realize that Kled, you know, says things like Noxus was created to train the faithful. What does that mean, Kled? Right? Like, what, you were there, right? So what do you mean Noxus was created? Did you create Noxus? Do you know the people who created Noxus? Do you have a plan for Noxus that you've just forgotten about because you spend all your time getting drunk off of mushroom juice? Like, all of a sudden, this character that formerly was just a meme, just a complete joke, has some more depth to him, has some more character, has something that you can get a little bit more excited about. And that is one of the biggest advantages I see in champion voiceovers, is all of a sudden that makes big changes. And consider, for example, some of the other characters that we have in League of Legends, and the disservice their voiceover does to them. Vex, I think, is a really good example of this. Vex is basically just teenage angst, the character, which is not interesting in the slightest. That said, if Vex's voiceover talked a little bit more about the reasons why she's so depressed, for example, that she's immortal and she knows that everyone she's ever going to meet or know or love is going to die at some point, and that's why she hangs at the Shadow Isles, because at least all the specters there will never go away, all of a sudden, Vex stops being just a, oh, haha, she's an angsty teenager, and more of a sort of tragic character again. You get to know her a little bit better as a person. And all of this is important because the better you know a character, the more interesting a character becomes, the more excited you are going to be to then play as that character, to interact with that character, and to engage with the Runeterra IP, which is something that Riot absolutely has a vested interest in making you do, especially now that they have a show like Arcane, that they have multiple games all set in this universe, that they ideally have more plans down the line that they are aiming to, you know, put into motion with the Runeterra IP, which is their biggest IP so far. It only makes sense. And this is something that I feel like Riot have dropped the ball on with a lot of their most recent champions by cutting back on these champion voiceovers. Zeri's voiceover, for example, doesn't challenge any of the expectations you know about her as a character. You look at her and you say, oh, okay, she's like kind of this zippy, zappy, lightning girl. Okay, sure, and that's her voiceover, is she's a zippy, zappy, optimistic lightning girl. That's it. That's all you get. I don't care about that as a character. That's not interesting. That's the surface level, what I expected, and playing the character then means that there's no hidden depth there. I'm not suddenly more excited to play this character than I would have been ordinarily. And I think, and this is the direction that Riot have been heading with their voiceovers, is we used to have 15 to 20 minute voiceovers for all of a character's lines, and that was incredible because that meant that we had a lot of opportunities for Riot to give us some more development and some more interest and excitement about the characters, versus the current iteration where all they have time for is the bare minimum characterization possible. And that, I think, is a disservice. And realistically, I think one of the reasons they did this was because people were complaining about champions having long voice lines. That's not the problem. The problem is not that a character has a long voiceover line. And realistically, even if someone did have a problem with this, I feel like there's very little reason to specifically say, oh, that's a problem, when players can mute champion voice lines at will, right? That's a setting you can turn off. If you've decided, I don't want to hear Tarek talk about gems anymore, you can turn that setting off. And I think that the advantages gained by having voiceovers on by default and letting new players experience your characters as they are intended to be is significantly more of an advantage than appeasing a very vocal minority who doesn't like their champions being so talkative. And especially when the talkative that they're mostly talking about are lines like Super Galaxy Rumble, where he has like an attack line for every single spell he casts. Okay, that's fair, and that's something that Riot have tuned back, but I think to sacrifice other champion voiceover in the name of that goal is a mistake. So anyways, that's going to be it for me, guys. I know this was a little bit more of a ranty video today, so if I haven't made any sense, let me know down in the comment section below. But also, if you have sort of a rebuttal for why champion voiceover doesn't matter as much as I think it does, let me know that down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.